so great to see these guys.
I know. What a sight for sore eyes.
Hey,
Look at these handsome gentlemen.
Hello.
Hello.
How are you?
Hello.
Good to see you.
How are you guys?
Sammy, you
Jump
look
on.
well. What's happening, my friends? Nice to see you.
Who's losing?
Mark,
Vinnie.
obviously. Sam, man, this reminds me of the first time I ever saw you. You remember that?
I have no memory whatsoever.
Are you kidding me?
No, tell me.
We were in the Deadwood, in the back where we played pool. I remember. It was like this first weekend we got to Iowa.
My memory is of the first time that I heard you because of the decibel levels of Vinny's voice. You know, it was like a carnival barker in the back room of a bar. But
I don't feel that's accurate.
It was all downhill from there.
I remember spotting Sam's blue glasses across the room at EPB.
Ooh, I bet you do.
Love at first sight.
She's like in
It was
love with
lit.
Sam from the.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
yeah, she was, man.
We were in every single workshop
true?
together.
How could that have happened? What good luck.
This is like, this is my principal memory of that first couple weeks at Iowa. Is that you two guys cruised in and announced to the rest of us, you will consider your 2 years at Iowa a failure if you do not leave with a life partner.
That's
You guys
correct.
become absolutely committed to finding true love. Lila and I breezed in and we were like, yeah,
Love isn't real.
love isn't real, man. And here we are, man. Here we are.
Yeah.
Largely because of Connie Brothers,
Absolutely.
who conspired. She saw it first. She conspired to put us in the same workshop every semester. Finally, we caught on. And, now we have 2 children.
Connie never found love for me.
Oh, she's still looking, man.
You know,
She's still
like,
looking.
Yeah.
Wait, so
You guys found love with each other.
That's right. That's true.
Well, why'd you guys come to Iowa, as opposed to somewhere else? What got you out there?
I mean, Iowa's the mountaintop, man. It's like you apply to Iowa if you want to be a fiction writer in the same way that you buy a Powerball ticket when the numbers hit 300 million, but you don't ever expect it to pay out. Do you guys remember getting the phone call from Connie?
Yes, distinctly.
I got a letter. I got a letter first and then a phone call.
Yeah, it was really the top first round draft picks that got the phone call.
Yeah.
Here's what I remember. I got a letter in the mail from, the Iowa Writers Workshop, but it was in a thin envelope. Just one of those, clearly one piece of paper. And I was like, oh, didn't make it. And I was standing at the top of the stairs and I opened it up and it said, Dear Lila Byock, we're pleased to tell you that you've been admitted to the Iowa Writers Workshop. And I was so startled that I fell down the stairs.
Wow.
What about you, Mark? I mean, you did writing in undergrad. Did you?
I did, but I didn't. I did not. I went to USC because of the film school, and because I was slightly dissatisfied with how they taught story. I added English and creative writing, and I met T.C. Boyle, and I kept noticing, as you do when you have a creative writing major, that all these authors that you're reading, some of them went to Iowa, and it was like, what's Iowa? And T.C. Boyle had obviously gone to Iowa. And he was like, you should apply to this place, you should go. But it was like, if not for him, I would never have even thought of that as a possibility.
You went to film school, right? You started
Yes.
out wanting to be a Hollywood dude.
Yes.
And now you're a Hollywood dude.
Yeah.
Do you, what?
Full circle.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so was Iowa a catastrophic misstep in the
Yeah.
middle?
It was
Was it
a
just a
complete
wacko
waste of time.
holiday? Yeah.
I feel like the way that story is taught at Iowa and the rigor that you have for language, it shouldn't be such a one-to-one for screenwriting, but in a weird way, in a very roundabout way, it just is. And I can't quite put my finger on why, but it seems to have something to do with, you do have a limited form, you have a small amount of words you can actually work with. There's a lot of white space when you look at a screenplay.
And not only that, but I would say, we were all in Ethan Kanan's workshop together our first semester. That's how we all fell in love. And I remember Ethan Kanan always had that saying that he would drill into us over and over. What are you putting in the reader's backpack?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that was a Conroyism, right?
Yep.
Oh, was it?
I think so, yeah.
He got it from
So wait,
Conroy.
what did he mean by that?
Plagiarist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, he would say to us, here's this detail here. It was a bright sunny day. That's going in the reader's backpack. And if the reader gets to the top of the mountain, finishes the story, and they realize that they've been carrying a very, very heavy backpack full of irrelevant details, they're going to be very frustrated with you. And so you have to make sure that every single item that you're putting in the reader's backpack is there for a reason. It has to get used by the end of the story. And that is so crucial in screenwriting in a way that
Totally, man.
like I think about all the time, every time I sit down.
Yeah, it's a form that depends entirely on economy.
And we actually use that, like when we've been in a room together, we always talk about like, oh, we've got this in the backpack, we should use this. Yeah. It's funny, I think about that all the time. The one that I was thinking about the other day was the Frankism. He drew this thing on the board when we were all in workshop. It was this pyramid, and it was different layers of this pyramid, and at the bottom was meaning, and then it went up, meaning, sense, clarity, and the added one, which is brevity, which I think was really smart. And it was like, yeah, and it's like you gotta light up the bottom layer before you get to the next one, and only a small number of stories actually have something to say, actually like have a theme. And I think that is very true with screenwriting, that at the basic level, you've just got, like, things have to make sense. You have to be able to see things, like a scene has to just work, and you have to be able to see it in your eye.
And how difficult just to accomplish that basic thing. I remember I turned in the first script that I wrote for Masters of Sex, the first TV writing gig I had. And this woman who became a great friend of mine, who was executive producer on the show, she was thrilled about it, but in part she said, the intention of every scene is clear.
Right.
And it seemed like, I felt like
faint
it was,
praise.
I've been so damned with faint praise, but now I understand like how incredibly difficult it is to accomplish that basic thing. And that's something that I think there's a rigor there that we all picked up at Iowa.
Hey, what do you guys say to young writers now who are thinking about coming to Iowa, and maybe they don't know if they want to be short story writers or novelists, and maybe they're interested in being television writers, screenwriters like we are. Why should they come to Iowa?
I think the answer is, that's where you can find your people. There are so few opportunities in the world to, spend a couple of years with no real responsibilities except reading and writing and collaborating with friends in a literary endeavor. And Iowa was one of those places.
Yeah, I feel it's a permission slip for 2 years to do just that and to feel. Like I think there's a syndrome that it's not quite imposter syndrome, but it's like when you're a young writer and you haven't yet published anything, you haven't written anything for money, you kind of feel like, is this real? I feel like a rumor, like what I'm doing doesn't feel actual. To me, at least, when I got to Iowa, it was a ticket to just be like, well, this is what you're doing for 2 years, so take it seriously. And immediately upon visiting Iowa, it felt like, oh, this is not only a place where you can live and you can read, you can get stuff done, and it felt like the exact tempo of life that I know for me at least was necessary to actually put words on a page. I don't know if it was ambition or by design that we all ended up doing the one thing that you can actually replicate, the writer's workshop experience. Like every day we basically, when we're on a show.
I think it's totally by design.
Yeah.
I mean, because I think, well, at least for me, I'll speak for myself. Like I need to have a job where I'm with other people.
Yeah.
And so when I discovered TV writing and found out that you could literally sit in a room with your friends all day and write, I was like, this is the dream. I can't imagine anything better than that.
Well, there's so much about having been at the workshop that I feel like prepares you for being a TV writer in a way that nothing else does. Because
100%.
Like the workshop, you write your stories by yourself in a way, although I feel like I was at every step of the way in every story that I wrote there. I was taking walks with all of you guys. I was calling you on the phone in the middle of the night to get input, to bounce things off of you, all that stuff. But also when you come together to talk about them in workshop, you learn to have a certain rigor in your conversation, to have a vocabulary for talking about it, which seems so basic, but a lot of people don't have it. There's nothing in learning to be a writer if you don't go through that sort of experience that really teaches you how to talk about story. And it also teaches you to have a thick skin because, when you're sitting in there and people are talking about your story, you can't say anything, you just have to listen. And when you are talking about somebody else's story, you're putting your impressions up against another person's, and you're trying to hash it out and get down to the nub of what the thing wants to be, not what it already is.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's what the experience of being in a writer's room is, just refine.
Well, it's having a thick skin, but it's also, on the other side of it, learning how to talk about story and be critical in a respectful manner where you're not cutting
totally
it down.
right. Yes.
So obviously your first instinct when you come up against a story problem in somebody else's story, there's that little voice in your head that goes, what? They do this, this is bad, and I have the solution. When I was on my, the first assistant job I got coming out of undergrad, and I remember it was when he was choosing writers for his writer's room. And he had me read all these samples with him, and we talked about them, and then he chose this batch. And I had the dumb audacity, as I was like 22, to be like, do you really think that this batch is the best writers? And he was like, no. They're the people who I can work with for 34, 35 weeks because like I'm gonna be locked in a room for 10 hours a day with them. And they're very good writers. Some of them are great, but they're all good people and they all know how to talk about story and they all know how to be respectful. Like that is huge.
Well, and also because what you're trying to do in a workshop is not just talk about what's on the page, but talk about what the story wants to be, like where it wants to go. You have to look at the imperfect thing and try to imagine your way to the best version.
Yes.
And that is what TV story breaking is.
Well, totally, man. And that's an act of love. It's an act of generosity.
Yes,
And obviously it requires like incredible skills of close reading. But like in a writer's room, you guys know, I mean, like ego is death.
Yep.
Defensiveness is impossible, you know, and competitiveness destroys any possibility of success. Part of the like miracle of that experience at Iowa is that it takes something that is so insular and private and it teaches you how to share it as a more communal experience.
Man, that was the other thing that Ethan told us that first class, because we were brand new, we just gotten there, and he said, I know y'all got your dreams, you're gonna write the great American novel, you're gonna make it big, but you must make competitiveness a positive force.
You can run into people who actually think it's a zero-sum game. Like if I win, you lose, and vice versa. And the thing that I think we've all experienced is when you're in a good writer's room and it's humming, and somebody has a great idea, like you just get into this flow where that just trickles through everybody else in the room, and suddenly, like, it is
the
just
deal.
magic
It's like
for a while.
the best hour you ever have on a casino floor is when you're sitting at the blackjack table. It's not when you get blackjack, it's when the dealer busts, right? And so it's like when you're sitting in that room and it's happening, everyone is winning, the dealer is busting, and there's any sort of sense about pride of ownership or where the idea comes from is sort of lost, right? It's like a collective win, and that's the thing. Like I remember feeling that at Iowa. Like we, I think you initiated this little like habit of calling us sometimes in the dead of night with a writer's helpline question.
Writer's helpline,
right? I'm saying like, and this guy needs to have had like a dead end job that was so bleak that it drives him, you know, like to the edge of suicide on a gloomy night. What could it be, you know?
I'll tell you my favorite one. It was my favorite one ever. So I called you and I said, give me something I could find in my father's wallet that would reveal the ultimate futility of romantic love. And you were like, oh yeah, it's a canceled check to a ballroom dancing school. Or it's a photograph of Bo Derek clipped from a magazine.
Listen, that's all autobiographical. You can use it, but it's autobiographical.
But just to be clear, we all still use the writer's helpline.
Oh, yeah.
Vinny and I called Sam up when we were on the right stuff and we had an intractable problem and we were just like beside ourselves and he came up with the answer. And like we do that all the time. I mean, it's like,
Well, here's the deal. Other people's problems are a delight.
The best
you know what I mean? Like,
problems.
it's the greatest thing in the world, man. To be able to
Totally.
solve somebody else's problem. By the way, they're also always easy to solve.
They're so
Whereas
much
my own
easier.
problems are impossible. They're intractable.
So much easier to solve other people's problems. But that's like, there is like a fundamental lesson in like what writing is and how it should be done. You know, that's in that. Like it must be a combination of your internal voice with other people.
Totally, man. But it also is about like a surrender of ego at a certain point because there's a joy in quality. There's a joy in elevating the work. There's a joy in having the experience of not caring whether the best idea is your idea or somebody else's idea.
saying I need help. I don't have the answer. I actually need help.
Well, and furthermore, I know you guys have all had the experience of when it's humming in the room and you get to something that's great, inevitably at the end of the day, you cannot remember who came up with what, where that great line came from, where that great turn came from. It just came from the collective. And it just, the idea of the ego is just totally subsumed. And that is the greatest relief. It is the greatest relief. It's the greatest gift to feel that.
Yeah. I was just thinking about what Frank Conroy used to call it when the room was humming like that. Do you remember?
The champagne bubbles?
Champagne in the air.
Champagne in the air, man. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
So what's the difference? What's the difference between writing for the screen and writing fiction?
I feel like, go ahead.
Oh, I mean, I was just gonna say when you're writing for television, somebody brings you lunch.
Yeah,
that is true.
The only difference. I also think there's this, interesting thing that I think happens to people who have written prose and come out here, and there's a frustration that you can feel with the form, because if you've come out of a good MFA program, you have formed these skills about language, and then it can be frustrating to come into a form which is a little bit more schematic and that seems more limiting. But I think that
and that isn't really intended to be read on the page.
And it isn't intended to be read on the page, which I think is that's a really important thing to keep in mind, is that you are not creating a piece of writing. The best thing you can do in writing a script is to allow an executive or an actor or director to see the movie in their head, and anything you can do to get to that thing is crucial. And so if you already have these skills that a good prose writer coming out of an MFA program has, if you can learn the grammar of filmmaking, if you can learn how to tell a story visually, and I mean, cinema is amazing, right? It has photography, and it has this new art form, which is editing, which is like the dream logic. And knowing those things and knowing that no other art form combines all those things and using those on the page, that to me is oh, you'll be way ahead of the game of most people who are working in Hollywood if, as an MFA grad, you can port your already really honed skills of language into that world.
I mean, there's something about the art of making television as a writer that's really improvisational. Reminds me a lot of playing jazz. I used to be a jazz musician. I harbored fantasies of being a professional jazz musician, which is the only career path that is more profoundly dumb to try to pursue as a kid than making art as a writer. But to do it, I think you need to be present and available, and to listen to the text, and you need to have cultivated habits of mind and thinking, a sense about what's important, as you say.
Yeah, the first time I was ever on set was the second season of Manhattan. I came out to Santa Fe for this episode that Lila and I had written, and literally within an hour of being on the set. You remember this scene we were trying to do with Jefferson White?
By the way, I love the scene.
It's a great scene. It's a great scene. But so Jefferson White, who, by the way, was from Mount Vernon, Iowa.
And who played a character who was nicknamed Iowa.
That's right.
That's true. Lovely guy. Yeah. Brilliant actor.
Really good actor, playing a private in the United States Army in 1944. And one thing that I think we can all agree about privates in the U.S. Army in 1944, they're clean-shaven. They're clean-shaven. But Jefferson was simultaneously, he had a very large role in another show, a very fancy HBO show, in which he was required to have a beard.
He had contractual obligations. He was required to keep 8 days of growth.
Yeah, but I've been on the set less than an hour, and you run up to me and Lila, and you're like, okay, guys, we got to shoot the scene in 20 minutes. And the scene is just that Jefferson White, the private, is coming into the colonel to deliver a sort of...
It's shoe leather.
Yeah, it's just 4 lines. But now the scene has to explain why he has a beard. So we're gonna shoot it in 20 minutes, and we're standing there in the middle of the set trying to figure out what could possibly account for him having this beard. And I was like, man, this is crazy.
Yeah, it was amazing.
But you came up with a really good
We
line.
got there, man. It worked. It worked.
Yeah.
I remember that more than one actor on set raised an eyebrow.
But here's what the scene was. Here's what the scene was. He walks in and he delivers his information that he has to deliver. He's got his little peach fuzz beard. And Billy Peterson, who was playing Colonel Darrow, looks at him and says, what's that on your face? And Jefferson...
By the way, his line reading was better.
Untrue. And Jefferson says, I had a rash. I couldn't shave. I had a rash. But I'll take care of it right away. And then Billy Peterson says, keep it.
No, he says, you look like Paul on the road to Damascus. Keep it.
I thought it was the other way around. I thought it was keep it. You look like Saul on the road to Damascus.
Well, so his character was a kind of a religious zealot. Mm-hmm. But part of the deal was it actually in its way was a crisis in the storytelling, because you kneecap this character who had to be a force of institutional authority if he's going to let some private walk into his office with 5 or 6 or 7 days of growth on his face and not comment on it.
Well, that's true. And also, by the way, I don't actually think there's a real comment in the King James Bible on the growth of Saul's beard when he has a revelation.
How many days growth did Saul have?
It all depends on the translation.
That actually makes the scene better,
because it makes Billy's character seem like a little bit of a wild card.
Yes.
And that actually played into
gets
where
you
his story
inside
was
his
going.
head.
Yeah. It's a very curious scene. I will say, like, I'm not sure if I love the scene because of the context or if it's a good scene independently, but I do remember Billy Peterson was a great actor and he was a great sport. And we hand him, our like hastily scrawled sides. We give them to him on the set to read, and he looks and he goes, "I don't know, guys."
Sir? I'm sorry to interrupt.
What is that on your face?
I know it's against protocol, but I have a rash. So I will shave right away, sir.
You look like Paul on the road to Damascus. Keep it.
Yes, sir. But, sir, we found the reporter, or he found us.
I was thinking about the story of Jefferson White and his peach fuzz, and the way that you have to adapt on set to unexpected, changes. The wrong piece of wardrobe, the prop doesn't work. An actor is sick. Whatever it is, and I was sort of thinking that there's an analogy to Ethan Kanan's backpack, and the idea that we in the writer's room might sort of carefully curate every single thing that goes in the backpack, right? But then you get there on the day, and somebody else has put different things in the backpack.
Or they slid the backpack open and things are, yeah.
And then, sort of like MacGyver, you have to figure out, how could I use this thing?
Yeah.
This thing's in here, so it's gonna be in the show, and we gotta figure out how to use it. And there is something that's really kind of exciting about that.
Yeah, and again, it's not like a separate set of skills from having deep knowledge of the story. It actually requires a deeper knowledge of the story to be able to make those adjustments.
100%. And it is funny to me, it's like, it isn't the same in filmmaking, because on a film, if something like that goes wrong, they're like, okay, we'll put it at the end of the schedule, we'll pick this up later, or we'll stop down. It's like in TV, you have this train that is just going, and it's a freight train. It does not stop. And there's another episode right behind the episode you're shooting now that is being prepped, and the one you shot before is being edited. And if there is anything along that line, if there's any speed bump that really knocks things off, you're screwed. And that's how you get into real trouble. And I think that is part of the reason that writers are ultimately always going to be in charge of TV, because we're the only people that can really solve those problems in those moments in a way that is like true to story.
Because there's going to be a different director on the next episode and a different director on the episode after that, and you're still going to be there.
Yeah. So all of us, we learned to write, thinking about writing stories, writing books, where you're just releasing something into the literary marketplace, such as it is, and maybe 9 people will read it eventually. But when you make a TV show, you're putting it out there to millions and millions of people, and sometimes it lands right in the middle of the cultural conversation that is top of mind at that particular time. I mean, Lila, I know that you guys really had that experience on Watchmen. What was that like for you, seeing the impact that show made, and how much it became the sort of locus of debate in the culture?
Yeah, I mean, I think the interesting thing about Watchmen was that it wasn't even just that it arrived in the middle of the conversation. It was like it anticipated the conversation that we were all going to be having for the next year plus. And, a lot of people have asked me, like, how did you guys know? And it was sort of like, well, we spent so much time in that writer's room looking back at American history and saying, what are the original sins of America, and what are the issues that keep bubbling up in the culture over and over and over that we can't seem to exercise as a culture, and we made a show about that. In a way, it wasn't as surprising, I think, for us in the writer's room as it was for the audience when the world started to reflect the world that we had depicted in the show, because that was very intentional. We were writing about that stuff, and then unfortunately watching a lot of it kind of come true. We did not anticipate that everyone was going to be wearing masks within a year of the show coming out. I mean, it was incredibly surreal to see pictures of police officers armed to the hilt standing on the Capitol steps wearing their identical masks, like looking like a still out of the show. The conversations that we that the culture started having about race in a really, in the mainstream, the summer after Watchmen came out, after George Floyd was killed, those were the conversations that we'd been having in the writer's room for a year and a half. In a way, it felt cathartic to see the culture at large talking about those things. And sometimes that entails really hard conversations in the writer's room. And I think, we've all discussed before is that the writer's room can be a really raw and vulnerable place. And it has to be a place where you kind of mine your own personal experiences for the benefit of the show and the benefit of the other writers. On Watchmen, it was an incredibly diverse room, the most diverse room we've ever been in. And we had to find ways to be vulnerable with each other and really hold each other with respect and care while we talked about really, difficult things, had really raw and honest racial conversations that, I think made the show what it was. And I think that's why the show landed in the zeitgeist the way it did.
Sam, how do you think about cultural relevancy in a period show? I know you've worked on Manhattan, obviously. I know you do a period thing now. How do you think about the way that those stories bounce off of the conversations happening in 2021?
For me, at least, the question of why a story is relevant today is it's mission critical. It's everything when you're encountering a piece of material or trying to find your way into a piece of material. Crazily, when I wrote Manhattan, that's a project that began as a story about an entirely different war in an entirely different century, which is this is definitely not a creative process that I recommend to anybody else, but I was trying to write about the war on terror. And at some point, I realized it was going to be very difficult to write about history before the ink was dry with any kind of dramatic, much less moral clarity. I had to find another way to have that conversation, and did a lot of research in it and found that when you start talking about military secrecy and trade-offs between freedom and security, all the stuff that was sort of at the center of a national identity crisis, it felt like an origin story that had a lot to say about the world that we were living in the 2000s. It was crucial for me to understand that that's what the story was about, that it was a story about the beginning of the present, that it was a story about the way that a certain culture of secrecy was kind of metabolized into the, groundwater of American life. That affected every scene that we wrote. It was a show that was set in 1943, 44, 45, but Tommy Schlamme, our great director, always used to say that it was a story that hadn't ended yet.
Picked the wrong desert. I bet it's warm in the Sahara.
It's freezing. How much longer?
6 more plates, 90 minutes.
Who's got a spooky story?
Suppose I've got a spook story. You know that G2 guy with the glasses who was skulking around bushes with a cola bottle in his hand?
I hate that guy.
He vanished into the ether 2 weeks ago. They found his badge by the side of the road. Much the worse for wear.
Where did you hear that?
My secret informant.
Whichever whack he's boffing now.
We're looking for the
Nazi version of the Manhattan Project, right? We're basically looking for our Nazi Meeks, Nazi Crosby.
What's the opposite of a drunk English physicist?
Sober Irish priest, and good luck finding one.
I gotta empty the tank. If some guy comes back, looks like me, handsome, but no mustache, that's Nazi Fritz. Don't trust him! Open it.
You won't see me again. When the time comes, someone will contact you. You'll have the other half of this.
Ah! Holy shit! Somebody shot it. Probably target practice. Can't be a good omen.
We should bury him.
Pretty sure the bugs have it under control, pal.
So we just leave him out here to rot? That's what the Nazis would do. We're decent human beings.
You all right?
I don't know what we're doing here anymore.
Guess the guy who's supposed to tell us isn't here.
All right, so Sam, you remember where that scene started when we first wrote it?
I do remember. A piece of it is, like, we're carrying a story about a spy in the show. And it was a sort of unorthodox spy story we were telling, because it's a story about a kid who is an idealist. Almost all of these scientists who helped build the bomb, like, starts as this, like, lefty, secular, humanist, liberal, walking around a college campus. Thinks he's gonna defeat fascism and is involved in a race to beat the Nazis to an atomic bomb, and winds up helping to deliver to the army a device that has the capacity to kill tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of innocent civilians in an instant, and grappling with the sort of like ethics of that choice. One of the things I remember about the scene is sort of an issue of point of view that is specific to TV writing, right? Like, if we're writing that story in a novel, you have access to the interiority of the character. There's a lot that you can do to sort of bring the audience into the confidence of the character, right? None of those tools were available to us. This is a show that's sort of all about secrets. This is a character who does not have an interlocutor in a scene who he can talk to about what's happening. But once we got him out there, the pitch in the end, the sort of winning pitch, was that they encounter this dead animal and that Meeks feels compelled to bury it.
We should bury him.
Originally, I think there was going to be a long burial scene. Obviously, they always get cut, you know. But my memory is that was part of the genesis of that scene, was to try to find a way of inviting the audience into an experience of what's happening for Meeks.
Well, it's interesting because, you know, one thing about that scene is that there are, 5 characters in that scene, but you're only in one of their points of view, right? The whole scene is about what Meeks is experiencing. And so there's all this great dialogue that's really fun, and the dynamic between these characters that you're feeling kind of at the periphery, but Meeks can't enjoy any of it. You know, Meeks can't have fun with the jokes because he's having a totally different experience that we're getting access to through this flashbacks.
One of my favorite jokes, I mean, I think there was like a 5-page dialogue scene that was just like a machine gun of jokes. This whole conceit that the guys are talking about like how, well, we're searching for the Nazi Manhattan Project. So what would it mean for there to be a bizarro town that has a Nazi Meeks and a Nazi Fritz and et cetera? It was like a 4 or 5-page riff. It was incredible, including that joke of Harry Lloyd's, which is so great. You know, like we're looking for the opposite of ourselves. Like
Nazi Meeks, Nazi Crosby.
What's the opposite of a drunk English physicist?
Sober Irish priest, and good luck finding one.
a sober Irish priest and good luck finding one. What a great line, man, what a great line. And you're not even on Crosley for the line, but you're exactly right, because the scene is about Meeks, and it's about the fact that that Meeks is a billion miles away from the world of levity of the rest of those scientists.
But one thing I really love about that scene in particular, and about a lot of the work we did on Manhattan, is that I think there's always a temptation when you're writing a period piece to imagine that the past is very serious and grave, and particularly when you're writing about something like physics and the atomic bomb, and and everybody's very buttoned up. And Manhattan is a very funny show, actually. It's like full of jokes and witty dialogue that we all had a lot of fun writing. And I think it was really important to us to remember that even in times of peril and war and tragedy, people are still living their lives, and they're still making jokes with their friends. And I mean, that's obviously something that I think we've all experienced this past year. It's like, even in the darkest days, like the way we got through was by cracking jokes about the pandemic, right? And so I think it was really important to us when we were writing Manhattan to remember that these characters are still, living their lives, and they haven't lost their sense of humor.
There's another thing about that. I haven't seen that scene in a long time. I thought it was going to end after the flashbacks on it, and that scene works without going to find that carcass. It totally works. A lot of shows do scenes like that, but to me, watching it again, it's like, oh, that's what makes that scene really special and makes it feel that extra level of human that at least for me as a viewer, it's really rewarding to watch that scene now, because you feel like you've just hit a new depth for this character who has clearly got a lot going on.
Well, I think it's an interesting lesson in what the challenge of screenwriting often is, right? Because the first part of the scene in which we're getting the flashbacks, it's actually more similar to the kind of thing you do in a novel. You're getting direct access to the interior experience of Meeks. Of course, it's very effective the way it's drawn in the first part of the scene. But the thing that really makes the scene is the second part. And that's really what the game is in screenwriting, is to find external events that can be the vessel for an emotional experience happening inside a character's head, because not only does that give the audience a different kind of access to it, but it gives the other characters around the point of view character a window into what's happening for that character. And even if they don't understand it in the same way the audience does, because they haven't been privy to the flashbacks, they have to react to it, and it's not congruous to the emotional experience they're having in the scene. And that disjuncture is actually what makes the scene and what drives the story forward from that point in the episode.
Another thing that scene, I think, demonstrates is sort of the serendipity of what can happen on the day when you're shooting. So that scene was directed by Dan Attias, who's a really brilliant director and a wonderful guy who we've all worked with a bunch, and I really respect enormously. There's that beautiful, spooky shot with the fire reflected in one lens of Meeks' glasses. Chris Denham plays Meeks. What a great shot. What a great, something about the fact that it's one lens and not both, too, and this sort of sense of a character who's divided and who's basically found himself in hell because of a choice that he's made. All of that's really incredible. Then there's a second thing, which is that in the flashback, right, where he's with the handler gives him half of this wrapper and tells him that his, somebody's going to contact him with the other half, and he barfs in the woods. So we were about 10 minutes away from shooting, and there's a lot of crazy weather in Santa Fe. I can't remember what month that was when we were shooting, but it was in March or maybe even the beginning of April. And this a blizzard the likes of which I have never seen on any set anywhere. I mean, it was like we were inside of a snow globe. This storm blows in, and the continuity was crazy, right? There's no snow anywhere else in our show. And we just sort of had to embrace it. I love it in part because it lends an almost kind of Lynchian surreality to this memory that Meeks has. We talked about it a bunch at the time. We had no choice but to keep shooting, but did it really snow? Is the snow sort of part of the mise en scène of a very confused memory for Meeks? I'm not really sure, but it became central to the kind of look of that sequence in a way that, like, retrospectively, I love. It does make a lot of sense.
But it looks great, and the way the color palette contrasts from the front story piece of it, the way the snow contrasts to the fire. I mean, it seems very intentional.
I remember so vividly being on set to shoot it out there. It was incredibly cold. Our prop master, a guy named John Harrington, who also you've worked with separately as well, lovely guy, really brilliant, had a cardboard box full of live maggots, and he's
I remember that.
He's heating them with a blow dryer because when they get too cold, they don't act, and you want those maggots to, if you bring out a bunch of live maggots, you want them to act. And so it's just something about the commitment of seeing John Harrington like lovingly blow dry his box full of maggots. It was a special thing.
We've all been on that show where nobody cared enough to figure out if the maggots were temperature sensitive.
It's crucial, man. You gotta know your maggots. I remember he also told me there was that dead coyote, and he said, you know, I found that myself. I brought it out here. I flew it out, but they wouldn't let you check that on a plane. I said, really? And he said, no, it's a carry-on. Carry on. Listen, you look for a prop master who's quick with a pun.
I'm so glad we got to do this.
So fun, yeah.
There has been no year since we all met in the fall of 2002 that I have been physically with you guys so little.
I know.
True. Yeah.
It's true, you guys just existed as these little kind of abstractions in your Brady Bunch
Zoom windows.
boxes and my laptop, and here you are in the flesh.
Here we are.
And even those little boxes were that got me through a lot of this year.
Almost got me through.
But this is what I need right here. This is what I need.
It's a nice walk down memory lane with you guys.
It was. It's great
Iowa.
to see you, friends.
Thanks
I'll
for
see you
coming,
guys
guys.
in another 20 years. Just kidding. I'll see you guys in 15 minutes. Let's go get a burger at George's. No, this is lovely, and like all good things, began in Iowa.